Welcome to Gray Maybe, a limited series podcast and social experiment based on the topic of abortion. My name is Jillian Schmitz. I'm a professional dancer, actor, teacher, author, artist, and cat lover. Through my own personal journey of recovery, I found that things aren't just black or white, or a simple yes or no. For me, in my recovery, there's been mostly gray area and a lot of maybes. In most of my stories, you can find the gray maybe. I'll be sharing my own process through personal stories, interviews, and hopefully stories of others in an effort to help lessen the stigma and shame of abortion. If you'd like me to read your story on this podcast, anonymous or otherwise, please email graymaybesstories@gmail.com. graymaybesstories@gmail.com. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're using to catch future episodes of Gray Maybe. A note before we begin. While the topic of abortion and my belief in it being easy and accessible to all people who can become pregnant is a comfortable topic for me, sharing my own personal stories is not. I have a justifiable amount of fear of possible hostility and violence, both in person and or online. I also anticipate the possibility of judgment ranging from my own family members to strangers, in addition to the potentiality of losing certain work opportunities for publicizing my own experiences. I'm telling my story through the lens of my own experience. The revelation of my process is mine to tell. If you disagree with me or my views or story, know that I'm not speaking on anything other than my own experiences and viewpoints. Take what you like and leave the rest. Any feelings my story activates in the listener is for the listener to process and recover from. Any criticism you have based on my experience and choices are yours, and they're not my burden to carry. Welcome back, everyone. I've had a few friends and acquaintances tell me that they're in the process of writing their stories for me to share. But so far, in the 3 weeks this podcast has been alive, I've only received one story by Alexia Knight. I read Alexia's abortion story in episode 3, and if you haven't already, I encourage you to give it a listen. While I wait for any possible stories to come in, I decided to bring on licensed psychotherapist, LMFT, and good friend of mine, Jaayda Ellingham. Jaayda has always had a talent for helping me get to the bottom of a feeling without judgment. As my good friend, she helped aid in the process of this podcast, and I wanted her to share her expertise in how she approaches therapy in her practice, specifically how she helps clients work with anxiety and trauma. Basically, if you suffered from any of the things I did in my first 2 stories, Jaayda and I talk in this episode a little about how to navigate those feelings. I also want listeners to get to know myself a little more and also get to know Jaayda, because I will be bringing her back for another episode focused more on her expertise. So, this episode is more conversational between the two of us. If you have questions you'd like me to ask Jaayda in upcoming episodes, anonymous or otherwise, please email them to graymaybesstories@gmail.com. graymaybesstories@gmail.com. Okay, so I have Jaayda Ellingham with me today. And Jaayda is a friend of mine personally. She also happens to be what I consider an expert. In fact, I tell everyone I know, I introduce her in conversation or in person as my friend with the master's in psychology. And actually, that may not even be true. That may just be the the label I've given her, but people respect what I say and they believe me when I say it. So I'm going to let Jaayda give her official titles. In addition to her professional titles, she has probably some other titles. But without further ado, Jaayda Ellingham, will you just give me your titles?
Yes. Okay. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. That title seems a little deceiving to people because it implies that I only work with families and couples, right? But my background is in clinical psychology. I have a master's from Pepperdine University. And I have my hours, obviously, and now I work in private practice. So what that means is in practicum, you do 3,000 hours of in-person, face-to-face with clients. And then you go to do a law and ethics exam and then a clinical exam. And I passed. Thank
Yay.
God. Yeah. And then I get the title of licensed marriage and family therapist. Another title that you might hear is a licensed psychotherapist or a
You
licensed
have that
psycho.
title.
Yeah, yeah,
You're,
yeah.
you're a licensed psycho.
Totally licensed, and that's pretty special.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm unaccreditedly a licensed psycho. Okay. Also, since you just brought up the hours, I want to talk a little bit about that because um, a majority of my therapy that I've gone to has been from people who are getting their hours, like
Hmm.
you were. And the thing that people, I think this could just be what I think people think, which is not a great way to go through life, by the way. But I feel like sometimes people think that, oh, I'm going to someone who's getting their hours, they're not as good, or they're not prepared, or they're not. That people don't trust them as
Hmm.
much. But what I found was it was much more affordable to go to someone who's doing their
Hmm.
hours because of a lot of the programs that they're doing. They're not allowed because they're unlicensed yet. They're not allowed to charge certain rates. So a lot
Hmm.
of times it's either, I don't know if donation's the right word, but it's like a sliding scale.
Hmm.
And so that can be super beneficial for people who really need to talk to someone, to find someone who is well within their budget. On top of that, one thing that I think people it makes them uncomfortable is that they are being oftentimes watched by their superior via a camera or something like that. It's not like in your face, like you're being interviewed, but there is a tier of supervisors or a
Hmm.
supervisor that is overlooking all of these sessions to make sure that that person is doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Which is
So,
fantastic, right?
yes, because I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to get the person that I could never
Hmm.
afford, right?
Yeah.
The person who's at the top of the top that would
Hmm.
charge maybe upwards of like hundreds of dollars an hour for their personal clients,
Hmm.
possibly. And I'm getting them watching this
That's
person,
right.
and they're in their ears saying, hey, I need you to follow up with this. Hey, let's try
Hmm.
this. Hey, ask them that. So I found it to be um, some of the best therapy that
Hmm.
I have had. And so I just wanted to say, so you did all those hours, and
Yeah.
so that's a huge time commitment. So say again, how many hours did you do?
3,000. So you do
Three
3,000. Yeah, 3,000 under
thousand.
direct supervision. Um,
Okay, so I remember when you were going through these hours, and I just remember when you say 3,000 hours, it's like, yeah, 3,000 hours. But I remember years of you being
hmm.
like, I'm at 500 hours. I'm at 750. It was like, I I got so sick of hearing that you weren't at 3,000 hours yet, and I was not you.
Yeah.
I didn't put in those hours. So I just want to highlight that because it's a big deal. And I just need people to know that if they didn't already know that. Okay.
Well,
So,
I think it speaks to process, right? Which
mhm,
I think that this is what we're going to talk about today is how important it is to not forget the process. Because
mhm,
oftentimes most people are looking at the content, right? So we're talking about, I'm a licensed LMFT or I'm a licensed psychologist or I'm a licensed licensed LCSW. All those are titles, but there's a process that goes down to get to that point. And therapy is process based, right? It's not agenda based, it's process based. It's really helping people come to their own process.
I like that. Yeah, and let's put a bookmark in that. Um,
Sorry, I jumped. You
and
don't even
keep
know who I
talking.
am.
No, no, I'm making notes.
Who
Oh, we
cares?
know who you are.
Who am
About to
I?
tell them.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm about to tell them. So, in addition to this, you are a mother.
Hmm. Of two.
Yes, you're a mother to two, and you had a career before this, which is how I know you. And
Hmm.
the interesting thing about, or yeah, so this is this episode in the podcast is following my second abortion story, and I met you when I was still bleeding from that abortion story. And the reason I'm even saying like make it being very like blunt about
Yeah.
bleeding after an abortion story is because, not to be salacious, although I am, not to be provocative, although I am, not to be bold, although I hope
Wait,
I am.
wait, wait, was I one of those skinny bitches that you were looking at in
No,
rehearsal? Oh,
that was the first story. That was the first story, Jada. This is
okay,
the
but
second story.
okay, sorry.
Try to keep them all together. I know it's a lot. So but you were skinny. You're still skinny. You're just a skinny person, a tall skinny person. So I met you when I was still bleeding from the second abortion. And I say that because I think so often, and I've already gotten some feedback from a lot of people who have listened to the podcast who said, I wish people would have told me more about what to expect in these procedures.
Mhm,
So obviously there's a couple of different procedures. I'm not going to get too into the actual medical stuff of it because I'm not an expert. I haven't talked to an expert. I haven't even done a Google and gotten some specifics. But I can say the three that I know of is being anesthetized, however I say that word, being put under, right, to have the surgical procedure. There's
mhm,
being awake and having the surgical procedure, which is in my second abortion story. So I've had one and I've had two. The
mhm,
third one is taking the abortion pill, which I
mhm,
also have friends who have done. And uh, all three of those procedures, everybody was told a very basic blanket idea of what those were going to be, but
mhm,
they didn't get a lot of details.
mhm,
And this may have been women giving them
mhm,
that information, which is kind of a double assault, that there wasn't a woman in these scenarios that could have said, look, this doesn't happen to everyone, but you may experience,
mhm,
or look, sometimes this can happen, or look, be prepared that this shit is going to hurt worse than you've ever fucking
mhm,
felt before, right? None
mhm,
of that. And in whatever doctor term, oh, you might feel some pressure. That is not the same
mhm,
as what a lot of us have experienced. You might have some discomfort. Okay, that is just not the same. But
mhm,
nonetheless, so I say that I was still bleeding when I met you because there is a whole recovery process after an abortion. You bleed for a while. It can be quite like a week, 2 weeks, somewhere in there. Again, I need to look up on my facts again, but that's about what happened. And you're not allowed to submerge yourself in water. So you're not allowed to take a bath. You're not allowed to go swimming. And you and I met on a job in the Bahamas
oh, wow.
where we couldn't I couldn't go in the pool. I couldn't go
Mhm,
in the ocean. And that was lame, but that is what it is. And so I say these things in case the rare opportunity that a man might be listening
mhm,
so that they kind of know a little bit extra if they haven't been through that, if they don't know the details, that this procedure that women that is so common, that so many women go through, there's so many extra things about it that no one really
mhm,
talks about, or that no one really might even know if they haven't been in it uh, themselves. So the interesting thing is I met you on this job quickly following that experience, and you and I knew of each other, but we didn't know each other,
mhm,
and we were put in a roommate
mhm.
situation
And we
by
both
the
tried to
company.
barter.
So we both tried to martyr, and what she's talking about is there was one. So first of all, we don't know each other. We know of each other. We don't know each other, and they put us in a room together. And as you get older in this dance profession, because we're professional dancers, you learn that you like have to put in a request of who you want to stay with, or you like kind of make it known. And neither of us kind of knew to do that, so we just got put together, right?
Which is
And
divine
both of us were
intervention.
like, okay, I guess it was divine. And so we're both like in this room and it's got one bed and we don't know each other like that. And we're like, I was like, I will sleep on the floor. And she's like, no, no, I will sleep on the floor. And I was like, no, no, I will sleep on the, and we did get like a rollaway bed or whatever. But I did take the rollaway bed because I'm more stubborn than she is. And I was willing and still are willing to martyr myself more than her. So that's how we met. And we were on this job together. And it was very quickly, we became very close,
Mhm,
very, very close. We had a lot in common in the way we saw the world. We had a lot in common in our purpose and our ideas. Um, Even when I first met you, you were already trying to exit from dance and you hadn't
oh,
put
I
your
was
finger.
thinking you were already trying to exit from a relationship. I was like, yes.
I'm not going to tell your business like that. No, and that actually, if that's what you were thinking, that you never told me that. I did know that you were searching for something deeper,
Mhm,
something that you felt was going to be more purposeful,
mhm,
and you didn't know what that was yet. You were kind of figuring it out, and later on it became what it became, and then you went back to school or went to school, because you didn't go to school, right? You went right into a
Mhm.
profession in dance.
Yeah, no, I didn't
Did
go
you
to
go to
school.
college before? No.
No.
You and I both graduated, and then we entered
Hmm.
the professional dance arena,
Yeah,
essentially, give
yeah.
or take. So you went back to school, and not only did you just go back to school, you went to get a master's, which is like, I don't know how many years, and you had kids. You had a kid,
Hmm.
right? At least one
I had Hayden during
during the whole thing.
practicum. Hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know how many lifetimes it would take me to do something like that, and that's even if I wanted to. But hats off to you. You got it
Let's go
done.
back to
You did it.
process, right?
So
It's process, Jillian,
yeah, I don't
right? We
like
don't want to
process.
jump. Yeah, you do. You're good at it. You're good at it. That's what makes your podcast great. It's based in process.
Well, that could be debatable, but I will take the compliment. Thank you. Jaayda thinks my podcast is great, and she has a master's. So anybody who doesn't think it's great, I already have one person with credentials saying it's great.
Well,
Um,
remember, we're not taking
one
ownership over other people's experiences anymore.
Yes, that's true. I'm working on that.
Hmm.
And I encourage any listener as well to not take responsibility over other people's feelings and reactions. One thing I want to slip in, and I'm going to make a note because I want to come back to that. You quickly, when we became friends, when I was still bleeding from the abortion I just had,
Hmm.
you were a safe person for me to tell that to. It was very quickly into us uh, talking, in our little roommate situation, that I divulged that information to you, and so you were a safe person to tell that information to, and I think that has it's part of who you are, and it's also been part of why I think you are so effective as a friend and therapist, because you just embody this kind of non-judgmental, you know, um, uh, uh, safe. You can tell me I'm not gonna, have a reaction. I'm not gonna judge you. Just, even when I've told you things that I know you have a feeling about, good, bad, or indifferent, I see you like hold it together. I see you pull it together to, be the thing that is, not being swayed one way or the other. So I wanted to discuss that because I mentioned that a lot in the what a safe person looks like in or
Hmm.
is, or I talk about it in the second story. So in the first story, I talk a little bit about PASS and PTSD. And you and I had a conversation a week ago about PASS and PTSD. And I said to you, I said, PASS which is post abortion stress syndrome, I said, PASS is not in the DSM for any kind of an issue, but PTSD is. And you mentioned that just because it's not in there doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of validity to it. And you
Hmm.
likened it to something that I didn't know about, so I was glad you
Hmm.
told me about it, and it made me happy that that was being recognized. And then it made me a little mad. So I want you remember that conversation we had,
Hmm.
right?
Hopefully,
Okay,
yeah.
so PASS is not in the DSM, but what is in the DSM?
PTSD. But the other
PTSD.
thing that is in the DSM is gender dysphoria disorder, right?
Okay, and what would be that?
Well, it's somebody who is not cisgender, who identifies maybe on the continuum of non-conforming or trans, male to female, female to male, right? Or non-binary.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, if you're seeing clients who identify not in the binary, right, not male nor female, um, they will get a diagnosis, right? They'll get the gender dysphoria disorder diagnosis because they are being impacted by society. So it's not a thing of like, it's a
There's
disorder,
something
there's
wrong
something
with
wrong
them.
with me.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It's that society, there's something wrong with society. And you'll hear the argument, well, it's a disorder, right? So there's something wrong with them. But the DSM really defines it as what is wrong with society and how that impacts their internal system, right? And so past would be kind of probably similar in a way, right? PTSD is really something that happened to you, right? It was outside your control, and in within that diagnosis, there's a cluster of symptoms. So PASS would also have a cluster of symptoms, right? So therapists are, well, the way I work, I can't speak for all therapists, right?
Hmm.
I don't work pathology based, right? I have to sometimes give people diagnoses if they want to get reimbursed by their insurance, right? Because that's the way our system works. But I'm less attached to a diagnosis as I am looking at symptoms, right? I'm looking at the cluster of symptoms that are presenting, right? So PASS is because, I had this abortion, right? Maybe the people, places, and things around that abortion impacted me in a way. And now I'm trying to resolve whatever. Maybe it'd be grief, maybe it'd be the trauma that's associated with the judgment. Maybe it's my own internal experience because of my history. And so, right, so that's what I'm looking at as a therapist. I'm not caring about the diagnoses.
Hmm.
Sometimes that gives people relief, right? So
Hmm.
I'm mindful that like a diagnosis can give someone a sense of relief because it feels like they're
Hmm.
being seen, right? But for the therapeutic process, it's really about like what symptoms are occurring, what are the triggers, right? And how do we give space around these triggers so that we have the capacity for authentic choice?
I like that. And for me, although I didn't get a specific diagnosis, in the many years following, I've looked back and I was like, wow, that was a really traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely qualified for PTSD, which
Yeah.
also post traumatic stress disorder. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're like, but when we hear PTSD, we're not like, oh, you're a victim of something traumatic. There's something wrong with you. We're immediately
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, PTSD. That's like when you've had really
You
bad
went to
trauma.
war. Well, no, people
Yeah,
go,
you
oh,
went to
it's a
war. That's the
war or
first thing
medical
we think of.
trauma. Yeah,
Right. Something.
you don't think of developmental trauma, right? Which is
Right.
that's not in the DSM, but
Right.
it presents developmental trauma will present as PTSD. It presents as depression. Presents as pervasive anxiety. It
Mhm.
presents as ADD. It presents as autism, right?
Mhm.
So again, like if I'm treating a diagnosis and what's underneath is not clear, I
Mhm.
cannot help the person get to any sort of sense of resolution, right? If I'm
Mhm.
just looking at the diagnoses, right? So, what I think is really amazing about your story is you can see how you were so attuned to your process, right? You were really like, I mean, I don't know if you've come to terms with that now, right? So now as you're writing your story, you're
I am
becoming
right now. You're doing it for me right now.
okay, good.
Yeah. No. Go on.
I don't know where I am now. No, I've
That's
lost my train of
my
thought.
the process. You
Yeah,
think that I was
I think that's the point of this podcast is that you're really highlighting your process, and there's such clarity around your process that it gives other people a voice, right? Because in therapy, that's what you're doing. You're
Mhm.
helping people identify language to their process. Sometimes all you're feeling is just chaos.
Mm.
Sometimes you have this sort of hyperarousal and it looks like shapes and colors and distortions, right? And we don't have a clear narrative around what happened to us. And so
Mhm.
that's really what therapy is. It's a space for the client to be able to share their process, to learn their process, and create a more clear narrative and then self narrative, right?
Mhm.
So that they can integrate
Mhm.
the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and what they want to do with it
Mhm.
because you
And
can't
then
undo it. It's there.
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think what um you have been saying for a long time and what you're saying even in this topic is that and what I had the hardest time wrapping my head around and why I think it took me longer to move through it than otherwise is that I really felt like what happened to me I didn't deserve to feel post traumatic stress because I don't know this idea that like oh it's something I got myself into like this like
Mhm.
very and that there's so much worse things that people go through, or like, I
Mhm.
don't know, it was this idea that like somehow the trauma had to validate me, not my experience of the trauma. And
Mhm.
I think that's kind of what you bring up is it's like, look, you know, this may not have been traumatic for someone who was raised Jewish, but for if someone who, like me, was raised Roman Catholic, this
Mhm.
could be a situation, right? Those are two
Mhm.
very different ideas about when life begins, what's right and wrong, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. Like that could become very, very muddy and
Mhm.
insidious if you are raised in a specific religion that has a specific set of ideals. And even though
Mhm.
I was not and wouldn't consider myself then or now a participant in that religion, it still was so deeply ingrained in how I metabolized that situation.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm getting a small note about what is the DSM.
Oh God, what is it? It's the Bible for
It's the Bible of
psychology.
psychology, right?
Yeah, essentially, right? It is how many pages? A lot of pages of different diagnoses to help either guide treatment or get reimbursed by insurance, right? And a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
really they either you love it or you hate it, right? And I am one of those people that I'm just not a fan. I'm just a fan. Sorry to the board, right? But I'm not a fan of it because it becomes so much of somebody's identity, right? And what I have to
Mm,
do in my work is help people diffuse from some of these sticky ideas, right? So we're talking about
mm-hmm.
you saying, okay, yeah, I understand that I come from a Roman Catholic background, and there was a lot of messages that were sent to me, whether they were overt or covert, right?
Mm-hmm.
Messages and family rules about what
Mm-hmm.
was okay and what was not okay, right? And if I were your therapist, I'm not, I'm your friend, right? It's I would be
Mm-hmm.
helping you diffuse from some of these to understand what's really what are we fighting here, right? So I liken it
Mm-hmm.
to um well, I don't ACT. So I use acceptance commitment therapy, which is like a type of third wave CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? It is more mindfulness based, it's more process based, and it's very much values based. So one of the metaphors that they use is this sort of bus, right? That there's all these parts on the bus, and we are not fighting these parts. We're not fighting guilt, and we're not fighting anxiety, and we're not fighting, right? We're not fighting these beliefs, these memories, because they're there to stay. And most people don't really like that. They're almost like, no, I'm going to get rid of my anxiety and I'm going to get rid of my guilt. And that is not therapy. Therapy is not to
I'll
get rid
tell
of
you
these.
right now, Jada, if I could
Yes.
pay someone to get rid of that stuff, like if I could be put out, wake up, and
Hmm.
it's gone, I would I would pay so much money for that. I
Well,
am
that's the
an
intention of
ideal candidate.
pharmaceuticals, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm that person who's like, I just want to get rid of it. But I do agree with you. It's not
Yeah.
going anywhere.
No.
And I am like the type of therapy I have been involved with is the type you are explaining.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
DSM kind of gives these guidelines for people if they're looking for a diagnosis or if they need a diagnosis. And just because it's not in there doesn't mean it doesn't exist
Hmm.
yet, because they do change over time and space
Hmm.
based on
Yeah.
data.
Hmm.
Um, and just because it's in there doesn't mean that that's all you are, and that you're relegated to that label, and that's just you're just, you know, I guess you're relegated to meds and whatever, or
Hmm.
I think that's what you're trying to say
Yeah,
too, is
you
that
have the capacity
some
for
people are
choice,
Mhm.
right? Doesn't that speak to
Yeah.
what we're really talking about?
Oh, choice. Oh, choice. A lot of choice. I hope to keep choice. I would like choice, please. Choice is freedom.
Well,
um
but do we have right? Like, so we're talking about choice, and we want to embolden people to have the real capacity for choice, right?
mhm,
Not choice predicated on their histories or predicated on their current circumstances or the government system,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Choice is coming from one's internal process to be
Right.
so aware of it and be able to regulate when triggered
Mhm.
enough to give the capacity for space to choose in the direction of their values. That is very acty, right?
Yeah.
It's that I can accept my present moment. So here comes guilt on this bus.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
guilt is
most,
my number one.
yeah, I
Guilt and
bet.
shame. Guilt and shame.
Guilt and
Two
shame. And
peas in
they're
a
on your
pod.
bus. Yeah, they're on your bus.
They're not
Right. And
just
there's
on
a,
my bus. They're usually driving the bus.
well, and so that's what I mean. So that you are now looking at this bus, and here you are, the core sense of self is driving it, but on your lap, sitting on your lap, fighting you is you're fighting it too. Guilt and shame,
Mm-hmm.
right? These are the punishers. They're there for a
Mm-hmm.
reason. They're there to protect you, right? We want to make friends with them. Thank you. This now we're sounding crazy, but thank you, guilt. Thank you, shame, right? You can stay on this bus, but you're not going to drive it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we have to know when guilt and shame are driving the bus
I'm
versus
going to try
your
that.
core sense of self. Yeah.
I'm not supposed to take your advice as therapy since you're my friend, but I am going to try that from now on as much as I can. I think that's a really good point, and I can see where, for me, so many things that I have felt guilt or shame or fear about have not been in regards to my own values. They have been
Mm-hmm.
in regards to the values of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know if people would think that that's kind of my MO by
Mm-hmm.
knowing me or like outwardly,
Mm-hmm.
but that really is the truth. Like, I often wonder the things that I would have been able to do had I not had I not been so conflicted about what my values were and what other people's values were, and what really meant something to me and what meant something to other people, and how
Mm-hmm.
I actually felt about it and what other people felt about it. So I think that's like a really important point in case that
That's
speaks to anybody.
well. Let's talk about that, right? Because I have
Let's
something that just came up
Perfect.
for me in hearing that, right? So this is where we talk about emotional boundaries, right?
I
Because
have
what you're
none.
saying,
Thank you. Go on.
we'll work on that, right? Well, no, you are learning them based on doing this podcast. This is a very
I I
heavy
I
topic.
have to say, a few years ago when I started therapy, I did have zero. I absolutely had zero. People
Mhm,
wouldn't know it, but I suffered, and I there was a great deal of I paid the price for that internally. Like, I
mhm,
really did, and emotionally, I paid the price of that. So I have come a very long far in emotional boundaries because I didn't even know really what that was. I just couldn't figure out why I was so affected by everything to the
mhm,
point of not being very functional. And
mhm,
so I just kept looking around and being like, everybody else is figuring this out, and I'm not. Is everybody else feeling like I am? And how are
mhm.
they able to mask it? How are they doing everything so much better than me? How are they able to keep it together so much better than me? So
Well, you
boundaries,
you
emotional
you have two
boundaries.
choices, right? You have the choice
Yeah.
to push it down and be depressed, or you have the choice to be anxious by it,
Hmm.
right? And that doesn't sound great, those two
I
choices,
like to do
right?
both, like mix it
I
up,
know you
like,
like to flip.
back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, like in rapid, rapid. Yeah.
Yeah, which is really disorienting,
Yes, it is.
right? I would rather see you be anxious by it because what I feel about anxiety is moving. We can move it,
Yeah.
right? As long as it doesn't
Yeah.
immobilize us, we can move through anxiety. So I'm a big fan of anxiety. Like I'm like anxiety can be your friend. I know no one likes this. I say this. I'm like, let's make friends with anxiety. People are like, no, we're reducing it. No, we
Hmm.
might, right? But we have to learn how to regulate. We have to learn how to stomach the anxiety. We have to
Hmm.
learn how to ride it, right? Like a wave,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because anxiety is a natural part of living,
Hmm.
right? And one of the things to manage anxiety, which I hate that word manage, but it is, in terms of therapeutic terms, we are managing anxiety. We're learning how to cope through anxiety, right?
Hmm.
Is to be able to, first of all, identify, right? So now we're coming back to it. Identify what is your shit
Hmm.
and what is my shit and
Hmm.
what is our shit to combine, right? So,
Yeah.
right?
So we'll use this podcast as an experience,
Okay.
as a not an experience. Well, it is an experience as
Experiment.
an example. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So as an example, like, just put this because that I understood what you were saying, but let's take this podcast as an example. So before I did this
Hmm.
podcast,
Hmm.
and it came up quickly,
Hmm.
how I was going to do it and how it was going to come through, and I wasn't entirely ready for the what it was going to be, but I was like, it's an hour never. So you helped me write the note, or what I would
Hmm.
say the warning
Hmm.
portion that I say before the first and second story, where I talk about, your criticism, essentially the criticisms or the opinions surrounding this is not my burden to carry. You helped me
Mhm.
write that and you helped me
Mhm.
figure it out because you, along with my therapist, were very concerned about how I was going to be like, like you guys are both a bit concerned about how not about other people or anything, but like how I be able to, um, because I was concerned about it, separate the art and the work that I'm doing because
Mhm.
I find it artistic to write these stories and tell them, and also be able to separate that from the possible opinions that could come my way because we know
Mhm.
this is a hot button issue. And would I be able to protect myself
Mhm.
emotionally in that sense or be able to separate it? And so you helped me do this about how to separate those things.
Mhm.
What is, you were said to me a lot, those other things that people are saying, feeling, experiencing, that is theirs.
Theirs.
It
Mhm.
has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. Well,
How
and so
you are feeling about this.
yeah, and so I know you, right? Hopefully, right? I
Oh
know
yeah, you
you
know
really
me
well,
pretty
right?
well.
I
Yeah.
hope more than your therapist, but otherwise I'm jealous.
You do.
Anyway, no,
You do.
I'm just kidding. Um, no, but I do know there's two things. I know that you have gone through, and I know this is your story to tell, but the feeling of unsafety in childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also know that you're a deeply empathetic person, right? I know that you have the capacity for empathy. I know that you probably have, a visceral experience of what empathy looks like. It's not cognitive, right? So it's not like, I mean, you have that too because you're mature, kind of, right? That
Thank you,
you
because
can
I would not. That's not a word that
classify
I would use
yourself.
to
Yeah.
describe myself. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, you
So
can understand the perspective of another, right? That's kind of
yes.
cognitive, right? Like my
Yep.
empathy, I can understand and I can articulate the perspective of another, whether I care or not, right?
Right.
I can hold a space for that, and I can have compassion for their story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's cognitive. Affective is I literally feel the other person,
Mm-hmm.
like I resonate with what they're feeling. So now,
Mm-hmm.
check it, right? Trauma does the same thing in a sense. You become hyper vigilant to the
Mm-hmm.
reactions of others, right? Because you were told on some level, I am responsible for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's codependency, what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
empathy, right? Somebody who is their nervous system is primed a certain way, has that same capacity and it gets twisted, right? So
Mm-hmm.
for empaths, people who have that resonance with their environment, they really, really need those emotional boundaries, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't worry about you, Jillian. Like I'm let's
I mean,
correct
I
this.
use where like you guys were concerned and wanted to make sure that I had some tools or like a thought, a process,
I
coming
just
back to
wanted you to have that
process.
boundary, right? Because
Yeah.
this is gonna, you are opening up a conversation that is going to trigger people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your story is going to trigger people, and what people do when they're feeling triggered, they don't tune into their process. They
Mm-hmm.
seek to purge it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you see by heavy reactions are the people that are purging whatever is coming up in them. And that's really hard, right? It's hard because if you have this idea that I'm responsible,
Mm-hmm.
there you go, you fuse to it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
my thing was like, no, no, no. My friend will do this. She's going to share her story, and all she has to do is hold this emotional boundary. Even if she gets activated in that emotional boundary will protect her so that she continues sharing her story because her
Right.
story is important, right? And it could potentially help others share their story or at least like be able to give them language to their own process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, and as of right now, when we're doing this, and we are doing this a bit before even the second story truly has come out, there has been one
Mm-hmm.
person who has sent a story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I have had many, many friends
Mm-hmm.
that I have in them saying, thank you so much for your story. Thank you so much for, all those things. I have said, because I know this about a lot of people, I've said, I'm ready for your story when you're ready to share it, or if you're ready to share it. No pressure, right? That's how many people I know. I don't even know how many people I've said that to. I'm ready for your story if you should ever want to tell it,
Mm-hmm.
anonymously or otherwise. So many people. and I have gotten one.
Mhm.
So
The
it's not a
avoidance
judgment,
can
it's an
well
observation.
the avoidance, right? So you're up against avoidance. You're up against what comes up in them as they think about that they might share their story, right? So in therapy, a lot of this would be, let's say, though that one person or some of those people I was seeing, right? And they're like, Jada, Jillian has this podcast and it really inspired me, and I really want to share my story, right? I just say, okay, let's do it. Right. And they're like, yeah. And then I start noticing what's happening in the present moment. They start to like shift their body, or they start to like,
Mhm.
lose sight. They start to change the subject, whatever. I'm going to be like,
Tell a
oh,
joke. That's what I like to do. Tell a
whatever.
joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Humor, whatever. Right. All these are signs of avoidance. And that's what
Mhm.
a therapist does, right? They look for avoidance. The, you're not actively looking for avoidance. You might fuse this idea that, like, I did this podcast and people aren't coming and telling their stories. That has to do with me, right?
Mm.
So there's that boundary again, the emotional boundary.
Mhm.
It's not my shit.
Yeah, no, and I
It's
don't
not my,
blame anybody. I want to be
yeah,
really clear.
yeah, yeah.
I get it. I
Mm-hmm,
get it. These are the last stories I wanted to tell publicly. As
mm-hmm,
you said on the phone a couple days ago, you said, "Well, you've been kind of, slowly exposing yourself over the years of
mm-hmm.
like, the last few years of like
You're testing it.
letting little bits, yeah, little bits of your truth out here and there. You've kind of like
Mm-hmm,
tested the waters over and over again. But for some reason, these two stories were the last stories I wanted to tell. They were the
mm-hmm,
absolute last, and I didn't want to tell them. They were not stories I felt comfortable telling. I'm still like, yesterday I went out, and it's only been, like maybe 48 hours since the first episode. Um, I released the first episode, and I was a little concerned. I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm ready to see people face to face and what they might
mm-hmm,
say to me. Not that it would be bad or like anything like that, but I was just like, oh, I kind of have to prepare myself that like I just as a dancer, I'm used to being in live shows of real time, of
mm-hmm,
gauging what's happening. It's
mm-hmm,
not an art for the most part that you just kind of put out and then you forget that you've put it out, or you don't have to kind of like reap the immediate benefits of for the most
mm-hmm,
part, especially if you've done a lot of live work.
mm-hmm,
So this is different because I'm like, it's just out there. And I've done things that have been out there, but this is so naked. It is so naked,
mm-hmm,
or feels so naked. And they are the last stories I want to tell. So I get it when people don't want to tell them. And I get if they need to not tell them. Um, but the interesting thing is that for so many people I know that have these stories, and so many people who have hit me up saying, thank you so much, there's one story that was sent to me.
mm-hmm.
So the balance of who's willing to talk about it and who's experienced it is
Mm-hmm.
so off.
Well,
It
look at
is
that. This
such,
is why we
it's so
politically have
telling.
polarization. Well, we've got the polarization of, right, choice, anti-choice, pro-choice, pro-life, whatever, because no one tells their stories. No one
Yeah.
connects really anymore, right? We have a lot of
Yes.
influencing, and a little substance, right? And I'm going to bring it back. This is why your story is going to trigger, because it is so process based.
And I have a theory that I've been
Okay.
thinking lately, and I'm not sure. We'll see how it pans out. But I was actually like, I was very concerned about the misogyny that would come my way
Mm-hmm.
because I am not, I certainly am not immune to it on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And often when I post something that is highly feminist
Mm-hmm.
or ask for accountability, I get quite a bit of misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
I get, you know, basic blanket misogyny just in the photos I post sometimes, but then I will get some very interesting direct messages when I post things that are like this person, like memes and stuff that are more like heavily feminist based, or calling
Mm-hmm.
men out, not even calling men out in an attacking way, but in a we want to hold you accountable way.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
is really triggers some people to then inbox me and be like, oh, well, this is, I don't understand that. This is, they want to have it's not really a conversation because I don't believe it's necessarily in good faith.
Mm-hmm.
It is a purge, right? But the podcast has been up for over 48 hours. It's been enough time for some dudes to
Mm-hmm.
listen or get in on it. And I have not yet, knocking on wood, I have no idea what's about to happen. I haven't gotten any of that. And I have a slight theory about that. I think that when, like what you're saying, when it's not personal, when you don't know someone specific story, you can put them in a box of this is what's right or wrong and this is what I believe.
Mhm.
And the minute you know that person's specific
Mhm.
story, all of a sudden it becomes a little more difficult to
Mhm.
attack them.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that will continue to be my experience, but it is an observation, one that I did not expect. I was really prepared, best as I could be, for some of that stuff. And I haven't received it yet. Now, this is not a call to arms to receive it. I'm
Mhm.
perfectly fine with not receiving
Mhm.
the influx of misogyny. Um, and that goes for not just misogyny from men directly, but also the misogyny that some women have internalized
Mhm.
based on, you know, who's around them, how they've been raised, what they've internalized,
Mhm.
um, with all that
Well,
stuff.
you're going to be activating whatever, right? By if they actually listen, if they listen. Sometimes if they're not listening, it's also avoidance, right? I don't want to connect with her story because maybe once I do connect with Jillian and her story, I might have to change the way I feel, or I might have to do something different. And some people aren't
Right.
ready for that change because what that change does is it has a ripple effect. Everything changes. And people like to stay to status quo when we're looking at systems, right? So, a marriage and family therapist looks at internal system, government systems, right? Cultural systems, all the systems that impact, right? It's bidirectional. It's, I'm impacted by my system, by the system. My internal system is impacted, and my system impacts others, right? So it's
Hmm.
impact, right? I just lost where I was.
No, I mean,
Went on a
no, I think
tangent.
you're touching. I think you're touching on something very specific, which is the compartmentalization
Hmm.
of how we function. And I think that it is natural to be very black and white in our thinking.
Hmm. Well,
And
that's
I think,
anxiety.
right, it solves it immediately, right? Like
Hmm.
it's either
It,
this
yeah,
or it's
it
that,
tries to, yeah.
this or that. I,
Yeah.
I personally really love black and white thinking. It's like really great for me. However, I have not received any of my healing in that
Hmm.
area. I
Well,
have
and that's
had to,
therapy, right? You're going
yeah.
to be looking at the processes that occur with the symptom. So if anxiety is a symptom that you're going through, or panic is a symptom, or a stress reaction is a symptom of something, we have to
Hmm.
look at some of the strategies of thinking that occur.
Hmm.
So confirmation bias, right? Black or white thinking, all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, right?
Hmm.
And so a therapist is going to be like, you seem to be
I have
catastrophizing,
all
right?
those. Check, check,
Well,
check.
but when we're talking about social issues, right? Some of the catastrophization is a way to control it, yes, but also stay safe, right? So if
Hmm.
I anticipate your reactions, if I say, like, by me coming out with my story, like whether I'm coming out as LGBT, or I'm coming out as authentic, my authentic story, I have to, like, sometimes with those social issues, I actually have to anticipate, am I safe,
Hmm.
right? So there might
Right.
be a decision based on that safety, right, of being authentic, right? People have died for being authentic now,
Hmm.
right?
Oh yeah.
And we see it. So,
Hmm.
so there comes the anxiety. The anxiety is there to say, like, let's negotiate this, right? So
Hmm.
people, it's been 48 hours that you've delivered a story, but it's a lifetime of going through this process in order to come through it to be where you are right now, to be able to disclose your story, right? So you're
Hmm.
activating things in people, and they might be like, I've got a story, and then all of a sudden they start to retreat, they go back into the closet, right?
Oh,
And
100%.
yeah, and it might take a year or
And
two or three or a
it's,
lifetime for them to come back
and I'll tell you right now, like, stay there. Like, I don't, like,
out.
I'm not, it may not be the time. It may not be,
Well,
and
it
it may
might
not be
be
how you need to
safer
work your
for you,
process. Yeah,
right?
safer. And it may not, that may not be something you need to do on your journey of recovery, or you may not even need recovery. You may be like, not for me.
I'm
Um,
good.
yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
But the black and white thinking,
Mhm.
it's certainly what this podcast is named after, Gray Maybe,
Mhm.
because for me, the healing hasn't been anywhere
Mhm.
in black and white. It hasn't been in compartmentalizing. As much as I love compartmentalizing, as much as that makes me feel safe and
Mhm.
it makes me feel like I have all
Short
the
term.
answers, It's very short term, and it has been in direct conflict of any healing I've gone,
Mm-hmm.
um, of any of my process to uh, be better with my emotional boundaries, to do the things that I was afraid to do, to take the steps in a way that made me healthier in my body, healthier in my mind, healthier in my spirit. All of that was in the gray. All of it was maybe, maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah.
It's not black
Yeah.
and white. It's a lot of different shades of gray.
Well, it's at
Um,
the cost of authenticity, right? So,
yes.
and I feel like that's a too great of a cost. One of the things that I do is I kind of liken my job to like an emotional chiropractor, right? So
Mm,
I try to line people up. I don't have an agenda necessarily to like what they ought to believe, right? But if there's contradictions in their thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and action tendencies, like what I tend to do from that, my job is to go to call out those contradictions, right? So those that black or white thinking kept you safe, it kept you retreated, right? But it was at the cost of authenticity, at the cost of true connection to yourself. So you either had to like be anxious or you had to be depressed, right? So
yeah.
transformation for you is in the gray because you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to live in depression or an anxious, hyper aroused state.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety will be there, but we don't have to
Mm-hmm.
be panicked by it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding relational safety, which is like I how I feel safe in my body and
Mm-hmm.
how I feel safe with others is vital to transformation. So this podcast is interesting because here you are disclosing your story to the masses, right? And you don't have much control over relational safety at this point, right? So
Mm-hmm.
people are going to react how they want to react, right? You took a deep breath.
Oh yeah. I had
Did
to
you
take
notice?
a deep breath
Are
on
you
that because
clenching? Are you clenching your jaw?
yes, of course I'm
Okay,
clenching.
I'm
I
not
can't even
laughing
open
at
my mouth
you.
all the way.
Uh,
No.
ah,
Oh, I know
okay.
you're not.
So release
No,
it.
because this is the thing. I thought about this yesterday too. Is that right now I'm getting a lot
Mm-hmm.
of love from people, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of love from women. There's been two men that have reposted as of right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's been two men that have reposted, and I bring that up because there's only been two men. One of which is in a same sex relationship, and that's
Mm-hmm.
important because
Mm-hmm.
he actually, as long as I've known him, would not be in a position to impregnate a woman, yet he is interested in posting that. So,
Mm-hmm.
really, I've had one heterosexual man repost the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm mentioning that because it's telling. Or I
Mm-hmm.
might have two. My producer Roderick, I'm sure, has
Mm-hmm.
posted many times. I'm taking him out of the mix because he's part of production. But there's been one non-pod associated person
Yeah.
who has reposted. That's a male. That's a heterosexual male. And I'm just going to say that, and I'm going to let
Yeah.
that sit.
Well.
But what I do want to say about what you're saying, the deep breath is right now I'm getting a lot of love from women, but those are people who know me. So those are people,
Mm-hmm.
those are friends and family. Those are people
Mm-hmm.
who know me intimately or not, or have worked with
Mm-hmm.
me. So they already have a kinship of knowing who I am. The
Mm-hmm.
next phase, if it goes there, that if it gets passed on to people who don't know me, gets
Mm-hmm.
passed on to people who aren't in my circle or my circle of my circle, that will be telling. And the deep breath that I just took is for the the anonymity that
Mm-hmm.
people have in social settings and how
Mm-hmm.
they feel they can relate to other people with their anonymous nature. How
Mm-hmm.
hard we are on people we don't know. How
Yeah.
much more credit we may give each other when
Yeah.
we know them. So that was the deep breath. Thank you for
Well,
noticing.
again, I can liken it to being,
That's your job.
I can only liken it to like what it feels like to be retreated, being in a same-sex marriage myself, right? It's like every day it feels like you're coming out of the closet. Especially, I look a certain way to
Mm,
people. So it's your husband. Oh, your husband is lucky,
mm-hmm,
or oh, your husband must, right? And I'm like, oh. Every moment is a negotiation of whether I, right, like my wife. Like I also don't want to be like my wife. Like, it would be
yeah,
nice if it was
right?
like normalized, like I didn't actually have to do that. I don't necessarily think that people are
Yeah.
being microaggressive, but there is this negotiation of like looking over your shoulder and saying, hmm, if I am authentic in this moment, will I one lose something?
Mm-hmm,
Because that's the way the world is, with punishment and reward, right?
mm-hmm,
Or will I
mm-hmm,
get hurt?
mm-hmm.
Right? Or do I have to just ride the discomfort of them going, oh, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
is, that discomfort. I'm going to actually feel that, right? Because
Yeah.
as an empathetic person, I literally will feel your discomfort.
Right.
And my job in those moments is to discern whether it is worthy, right, of the
Yeah.
disclosure.
Right. And that's what every person has to go through who's, of a minority class,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
If you're a person of color and you're in and amongst uh, situations and areas that are predominantly white,
Well, you can't
um,
hide there, right?
you
Like
can't
I can
hide there.
hide. Yeah.
You can hide yours. I can hide
Uh-huh.
mine. Um, to a point where women, so there's always like a bit
But you
of
can't hide being a woman, but you can hide
no,
your
you can't hide being a
sexuality.
woman. No, you can hide your sexuality. You can hide your personal experiences. But there is that always constant, uh, I think for people of color, and I'm obviously not a person of color, so I'm just guessing here that there is a bit of like this in some of these moments, although they can't hide their identity of it. It's like, do I want to speak my truth in these moments or not?
Hmm.
Or is it going to make things worse, or am I in a situation that could be dangerous?
Hmm.
Am I going to get a label that is societally like the crazy person? I've heard many of my black female friends talk about, you know they will self-silence because they don't feel comfortable speaking up because they don't want to be labeled the crazy black lady,
Hmm.
right, or the crazy black woman,
Hmm.
because that is a thing in society, that's a label. And so I think there's anybody who's not, the normal status quo of what is acceptable in general society, that would be, say, they belong to some kind of a minority class, has to kind of go through these mini negotiations.
Hmm.
Which, the interesting thing is, like, when I have been always very vocal about being pro-choice. Before I had my abortions, I was very
Hmm.
pro-choice. When I was a junior, senior in high school, I was doing reports on the RU 486. So I've always been, very vocally pro-choice. Um, and when I'm really vocally pro-choice with people, I wonder if it ever crosses their mind, I wonder why she's so violently pro-choice. Maybe it's because I've had a couple abortions, motherfuckers. Like,
Hmm.
listen, and that's the thing is like and that's the thing, we see people who are really passionate about being
Hmm.
pro-choice. And I'm not saying just because you're violently pro-choice that you have had abortions, because I also know quite a few women that have reached out to me and say, I haven't had this experience, but you know how passionate I am about this issue, because it does affect them and their freedoms, right?
Hmm.
Um, but it is interesting that it's like, yeah, y'all not really putting two and two together here. But at the same time, there is that negotiation. I'm not going to tell them I've had abortions,
Hmm.
but I'm going to tell you how important it is to me.
Hmm.
So, this negotiation that so many people right now, there is no lack of women saying, we want this right.
Hmm.
But there is a huge self silencing of women that have said, I have used this right. I have
Hmm.
I have benefited from this right. And there's
Hmm.
virtually no men saying,
Hmm.
I have benefited from this right.
Hmm.
So it's just interesting.
Hmm.
And there's not a judgment of it. I am not judging any woman who doesn't come forward. Trust me, I don't know why I had to do this. I just did. I would
Hmm.
I would have been more comfortable not, probably.
Well, I think
Um,
right now we're normalizing why some people haven't come forward,
yeah,
right? We're
100%.
validating that. We're not judging. I hope that people don't feel
Absolutely
that
not.
way because, you know, everybody has their own negotiation, internal,
Yeah.
external negotiation, right?
Yeah.
And just because you don't come forward in this doesn't mean that you're weak or doesn't mean that you don't have purpose. It,
Hmm.
it it depends on your situation. But the point is that you're coming forward with this, and whether somebody also shares their story, you are giving them a voice. You are helping them process their own discomfort, and that's
Hmm.
powerful, and that's enough. I hope you feel
I mean,
that that is enough.
I I feel like I'm doing something. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing, but it's something.
Yeah.
There's a couple things I'm going to go way back because I just want people to know this about you, because I think it's something that not a lot of people in your line of work talk about.
Hmm.
Um, when you were going through your schooling process,
Hmm.
the first thing I remember pretty early on in your schooling process, you called me and you were like so upset. You were so upset. And it's not the statistics because you were really upset about that because you had to go through all of your like generals
Oh,
and they
that
were
was
very
hell.
touchy. It was a
I'm
lot of
still triggered by that. That's trauma.
I felt like some kind of a life coach through the statistics
Yes.
portion of your schooling. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the first thing that you were so upset about was that you were like, Jillian, I'm not going to be able to help anyone. They're going to have to help themselves. And you were really upset about this because this was your whole reason for doing this. You were like, I want to help people. 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 I want to have purpose. I want connection. I want to help people. And I
Yeah.
remember one day you called me and you were like, "Ugh, I'm not going to be able to help anyone.
Yeah.
It's not even going to be my
Well,
job. It
I
was like you were all of a sudden realized that the job you applied for was not the job you wanted.
the
But you
one
got
thing
over that.
well, I did. They drive it home, right? And I think that people going into a psychology program, you're either an empath or you're a narcissist, right? Or you're both. In my case, it sounds
Holy.
like I was a little bit
Talk about
narcissistic in that.
dodging some bullets and landmines there.
Well, God complex, right?
Right.
If it's, yeah, I was always told if it's meant to be, it's up to me, right? So that, like, I sort of distorted that as an all or nothing concept,
Mm,
that I could, help people and fix them. So it turned into a codependency thing for me, like this heightened responsibility that, like, I could fix you.
mhm,
What they just sort of, you know, uh, pop that bubble, right? By saying you're not here to fix people, right?
mm,
Because if I'm like anxious by you, right? If I'm anxious by your story, I'm telling you something is wrong with you, right? So when
mhm,
people actively give advice, they don't reflect, they don't normalize, they don't validate, they don't do like the three therapeutic interventions that are really all it is, right? Uh,
mhm,
but they seek to like change you.
mhm,
They're telling you something's wrong. And what
mhm,
that does is it provokes more anxiety in the person, right? So my job is to really just hold a space. And yes, I was like, but what that meant was is like I can't do what I did so much, serial fixing in relationship, right? Projecting all the discomfort I had within myself in fixing others. I couldn't do it
mhm,
anymore, and so that was
mhm.
the grief that you that you experienced when I called you, was like,
Right.
oh fuck, I'm gonna actually have to be real here, right?
Mhm,
So what I find, and I think what you're doing is, I think that some of the best therapists use themselves.
mhm,
They use themselves, meaning they use what they experience in the present moment with the person. Like you saw how I went, you just exhale deeply. But I
mhm.
also was like, right? And so what I
You could
noticed
feel
was,
it over the Riverside program.
well, I could feel the tension in my chest, right? And
Mhm,
so the only reason I knew that you did that was I felt the tension in my chest in that moment, and I looked at you. I really looked at
mhm,
you. And I said, you just did a giant exhalation, right?
mhm.
And
For
so,
those people listening, we're on a system that's kind of like a
oh
Zoom
yeah,
system
no,
that's
I have
so
a
we can
no. I'm
see each
I'm
other,
psychic.
but we're not in yeah, we're not in front of each other, but we are
Yeah,
communicating through a system that's kind of
yeah.
reminiscent of Zoom. It's called Riverside. That's not a plug or a sponsorship. But that is the system we're using. So she's seeing me, but we're not in front of each other.
Hmm. Hmm.
Go ahead, sorry. Just in case
Well,
anyone
that's
was
it. That's it,
uh,
right? It's a
curious.
that. Well, and so I think for you, it's like you're not fixing people here.
Hmm.
Right? You're going to hold a boundary around fixing people because it's ineffective, right? You're helping people connect deeper to themselves.
Yes. Um, I'm a big fan now of holding space for
Hmm.
people. I didn't know how to do that. I learned that in 12 steps and obviously through your experience of your education. Um, because I also very much like you was a serial, how can I fix it for people? And not even how can I fix it? How can I tell them what to do to fix it? Like, I really
Hmm.
love giving unsolicited advice and solicited advice. So when
But
people
I'm
would
gonna
come
I'm
to me
gonna
with
pause right
problems, I was like,
there.
oh, great.
I'm going to pause, right? I'm going to pause you, pause.
Oh,
I'm going to
you're in
interrupt
charge
you.
now. Go.
Yeah, no, because I disagree. I disagree with that with you
Okay.
because, oh my God, I'm starting to feel emotional. You can't see it, thank God. No, but like, I think that you were in my life one of the most important people during really hard times, that you did hold space for me. And it was because you could hold space for me through some really hard relationships that I was able to get out. So I disagree. It was, I think that you have done that for people in such an impactful way. You did that for me. So anyway, that sounded really ugly, and I'm sure it
I
looks really
no.
ugly if you had a video
I
on
love
me.
us I love us crying on the podcast. So I hear you, and I take that, and I will take that as the compliment that it is. But I would also like to mention it was probably because I didn't know what to do in those few moments. I had no option but to hold space because I was like, I don't know how to help.
Well, but it works.
No,
See, but that
I'm
humility,
so
right?
I'm so glad that that was your experience because there's there's nothing worse than needing something from someone just to hold space for you and they are trying to find solutions and they're trying to distract or they're trying to like what I just did make a joke
Hmm.
but it's so like the holding of space is so important so that
Yeah.
people can work their processes and it's really hard to do because you will feel anxious and you will feel the desire to fix it for them or make a
Hmm.
solution or take that feeling away because we all
Or
know
take the
what that
burden. Yeah.
feels like.
Yeah.
Take the burden, do something. It's hard to watch people who are stuck or in pain or depressed or anxious, like when someone says I'm just so depressed,
Hmm.
what's the first thing you want to do? Well, go to a therapist, like call it helpline. Like how can I like just go for a walk? Like think positive thoughts. Smile, be
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's like
Which
all of
makes
a
people want
sudden
to
like
jump off a bridge,
the
right?
100% it brings
It.
shame in, right? Like there's something
Hmm.
wrong with me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to do. And I just want to say I'm not saying if someone is suicidal to not do anything. There are things to do and numbers to call and people to talk to. But I am saying when people are giving their experience or sharing their true feelings, the hardest thing to do is hold space, but sometimes it's the best thing you can do. And
Yeah.
that is literally it looks like just not talking. If
Hmm.
you don't know how to do that, all it is it's not talking.
Hmm.
All it is it's just saying, it's nodding, it's agreeing in
Hmm.
their experience, it's validating their experience.
And it's
You don't
reflecting,
have to even
right?
agree with it.
It's
Yes, and it's
reflecting.
just saying back, yeah, what has been
Hmm.
said in that way.
Hmm.
There is one other thing in your schooling that came up that I recall.
Yeah.
This was the second very upsetting thing next to the statistics and the I can't help anybody was that you had to systematically go through your life with a fine tooth comb
Hmm.
of unprocessed events. And you
Hmm.
don't have to go through any of those with me right now,
Hmm.
but I do
Hmm.
recall every couple days or weeks I would get a call about like in tears usually. I didn't realize that this thing had happened and it is terrible. And I would be like, oh my God, that is terrible. Why did you never tell me? Like I didn't even realize it. And so you had to kind of go through, which I think anybody who is on the empathy spectrum and not on the narcissistic spectrum has to go through when they're going to help people in that way, like,
Hmm.
in a therapeutic way.
Self-reflection. You
So
have
I
to know
just want to,
yourself.
yes. Well, you would hope so. You would hope that you're not going to ask anyone to do something that you
And
haven't
you're not
done,
willing
but
to do.
yes, but that
Uh-huh.
happens. Um,
Hmm.
okay, I have some questions for you.
For me.
That yeah, here we go. Okay,
Okay.
here's yes, yes, we're going to do some questions. So these don't have to be long answers. Here's a question.
Okay.
What do you think women or people who can get pregnant need more of, generally speaking, or in direct relation to abortion and reproductive care?
God, the
And this
only
could be
word
like
that
a
pops
one
up
word
is
answer.
it is support, right?
Yeah.
Holding space, support to be able to
Yeah.
process, and be able to negotiate their values. Not
Hmm.
preachiness, not telling people what to do,
Hmm.
right? People need support. They
Hmm.
also need systemic support. obviously, like, this dives into
Mm-hmm.
policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? We need to
Yeah.
feel taken care of, and that's not in a weak way. I could
No.
not raise my kids without a supportive system. I could not
Mm-hmm.
be a therapist. That's something else that is very important to me without a supportive system, right?
Mm-hmm.
We went through Jolene. We went through reproductive care. I had a supportive system,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Um,
Well, you were dead set on not having children. You were
that's
very
right.
much like, I'm not having children.
Until I met
Because,
my wife.
and then you changed your mind because you were like, I feel supported.
Yeah,
That's what you
yeah,
said.
well,
I feel
yeah,
supported.
because she held a space for me to be able to have that possibility. That potential then
Right. There's a lot of
was
women.
it manifested in that space of support. What does that look like though? Right? So people need to understand
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like for them, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
like just it's not like money. It's like what does it look like to hold emotional support for me to be able to go through this process, whether it be an abortion or whether it be raising kids or negotiating whether I have an abortion or I decide to be a parent, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
sex is like gonna happen. It's just like emotion. Sex
Mm-hmm.
is gonna happen. It's like, right?
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
ain't fighting that,
Yeah.
right? And things happen
Yes.
when you have sex.
Yes. Although one of the most famous talking points is like, just don't have sex. Because that's
Okay, because
totally, yeah.
those people that are creating those talking points don't have sex, right? Makes no
Well,
sense.
they're just more responsible than everybody else, apparently.
Of course, yeah, sure.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
they can
Of course.
hide it better.
Um, I think your point on support, I think it's all across the board, right? Like you're saying, it's
Hmm.
like pregnant people need more support. Uh, People who want to have abortions need more support. People who want
Hmm.
any kind of reproductive care need support. People who want to raise kids need support.
Hmm.
And a lot of
Hmm.
women are getting abortions because they don't feel supported, not only by
Hmm.
their family situation, but also
Hmm.
from the system. There's no one to
Yeah.
take care of you. There's no one to help you. There's no one to give
No.
you, you don't have someone to caretake the kid. You can't take off work. You can't afford to have a child.
Hmm.
Like all the things, right?
Right.
Lack of
So
support.
policies need to
Okay,
change, right? Not punishment policies, but policies need to change to help support people if we want to nurture that idea of
right.
raising more kids.
What do you think often gets overlooked on the topic and in the discussion of abortion? What gets overlooked, do you think?
Process. We went right back to
Process.
process. Connection to.
Okay.
Right? Whether you are getting activated by it because you feel that it's immoral or whatever arises in you, or you are activated because you're afraid of the judgment, right? You need to attend to process in order to move through it.
Right.
Also grief.
How
We don't like
grief.
grief. Yeah, grief is a big
Oh no, we
topic.
don't deal with it at all.
No.
Oh my god, that's a
No one.
whole
Oh,
podcast. That's
that's
a
a
whole
whole
series.
podcast. We should do a whole podcast on
It's a whole
grief.
series. It's like a
Yeah.
whole series of podcasts.
Uh-huh.
How do you think we can destigmatize abortion or reproductive care
Talk.
in general? Talk,
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 right? Talk.
sing songs
Actually,
about
talk.
abortion. Talk,
Talk.
sing songs, talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we also have to ride the discomfort, right? Of the stigma. You have to be able to,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a cultural conditioning, right? So you have to ride discomfort.
Agreed.
Mhm.
Okay. Last question.
Mhm.
Um, since the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, aka the Dobbs
Mhm.
decision, have you noticed, or what kind of conversations or discussions are being kind of made around mental health professionals? I mean, is it just like this? Oh, fuck. Like, is it just like this? Oh my God, this is going to be, or is it like, I don't know. Like, has there been, I mean, I know everyone, listen, I know every woman when this came down had a thing about it. Like, every woman
Mhm.
had a moment of just like shock, rage, uh, you know, uh, powerlessness, like so many really big emotions. And I know a lot of doctors
Or
are having a lot
glee,
of
or like like thank God, right? Like there are people that,
euphoria.
yeah, euphoria.
Oh my God. Like, I can't
I
even
mean,
say
but
that in
my
this
laughter
context.
is a judgment, right? Like, but again, we have to speak to that too.
Yes, some women were very excited to limit other women's freedom.
Yes. And that's
Yeah.
that's an important process. So we
And why
can't just
is
stay in our
that?
bubble. Well, right. So we can't just stay in our
And why
bubble.
is that? Yes.
Well,
Okay.
it's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so
A
look,
lot of
men-
feelings.
okay, let's go back to your question. Mental
Yeah.
health professionals hold a boundary, right? We hold a boundary from based on our opinion of something, what is activated in us versus how to help our clients, right? Many mental health professionals are in a bubble, right? I am kind of in a bubble of private practice. I do not, although I seek consultation, and although
Mhm.
we've had conversations, the people around me who are also providers, right?
Mhm.
And most of those are like, oh God, dread,
Mhm.
because we understand the impact, right?
Right. And what is that
Uh,
impact? Like
trauma.
what is trauma,
The
right?
impact is
Because
trauma and disorientation and right depression and more anxiety and more symptoms. It's not transformation, right? We're not, it's like a way to control something. And our job is to help people move through stuff, right? So this is just
Mhm.
another pile of shit on top of all the other shit that we've gone through, like a pandemic
Mhm.
and, like all the things, right? All people's
Mhm.
individual histories. And
Mhm.
so I think some of the issues with my field is that we don't necessarily sit at the table,
Mhm.
right? And advocate for policies as we should. I think there
Mhm.
is also a boundary because you know, uh, it is a lot to hold space, right? And you're holding space
Mhm.
for people daily. And so that's just another thing to hold space for, right? And so like we have to change that culture. I feel like there's not enough of it, and so we don't have enough people who are in the field speaking, using science as a way to influence policies. So I do think there's a problem there,
Right.
but I also know that there's
Right.
burnout. So
Yes.
yeah.
Well, and I'll just say on the last tip of that, and then we'll wrap it up, that with both of my abortions, I did not have as much as many obstacles as some women do. Right.
Mhm,
My process of getting the abortion was very easy.
mhm,
But all of my feelings and circumstances and situations around it were difficult. But I can assure you, I still would have gotten my abortions. If
mhm,
you made me travel state lines, if you made me take out a loan, if you made me ask people for money, if you made me have to beg, borrow, steal, I would have still gotten them.
mhm,
All I
mhm,
would have had was more trauma.
mhm. Yeah.
It just would have compounded the trauma. And I will leave it at that. Jada,
Mhm.
thank you so much for coming. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for giving your expertise. And it is expertise. Um, and I will find a way for people to find your social media if they want to follow you. I know you're not really big on social media,
Uh,
but just in
God,
case
you'll maybe
they
a
want to
post every year.
look you up. Yeah, look, maybe they want to look you up. I'm sure this won't be the last time I have you on the pod if I continue to go forward with the pod. I don't know how long it's going to go. I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm sure it won't be the last time. And thank you so much.
Well, I love you.
I love you too. Thank you. I always feel better after talking to Jada. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm going to have Jada on Gray Maybe again to share more of her information and expertise specifically on trauma. If you have any questions you'd like me to ask her, anonymous or otherwise, please email greymaybestories@gmail.com. GREYMAYBESTORIES@gmail.com. If you're feeling suicidal or in crisis, text or call 988. I will add the National Institute of Mental Health link in the program notes, NIMH. I will also add in the show notes Jada's Instagram account at Jaayda Therapy, JAAYDA THERAPY, and her website, www.jaydatherapy.com. www.jaaydatherapy.com. If you want to know more about PASS, post-abortion stress syndrome, or would like to visit a forum on post-abortion conversation and/or support, please visit www.afterabortion.com, also included in the show notes. I will also include links in the show notes to the DSM-5 website and the DSM-5 5th edition, as well as Psychology Today. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you were able to find something relatable in today's episode. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, this is also a social experiment to see if in telling my story and the stories of others, I can embolden listeners to share their stories. If you'd like me to read your abortion story, anonymous or otherwise, on this podcast, please email graymaybestories@gmail.com, graymaybestories@gmail.com. Reminder, there is a very important election coming up November 8th, 2022. Please have a voting plan, know the rules and regulations of your state, and vote like your freedom depends on it. Because now, more than ever, it does. For more information on voting in your state, go to vote.org. Thank you to everyone who helped make this Gray Maybe podcast happen. Producer and editor Roderick Barge, cover photo by Jose Perez, music licensed by Pixabay, special counsel Jaayda Ellingham and Roderick Barge. Special shout out to supporter Patty Ulgain. If you'd like to support this podcast, please rate, share, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now.